that they've got fewer long-range missiles, and it's much harder to send a missile all the way to Israel, much easier to target things that are much, much closer in the Gulf. And clearly, the Straits of Hormuz are an economic choke point, the economic choke point, the number one economic choke point in the world, with 20% of the global oil trade going through that narrow part of the Gulf. And they've decided, I think, now to choke it, already shipping.
On that, obviously from a diplomatic point of view, you're talking about Iran trying to put as much pressure on everyone to, I guess, then put pressure on Donald Trump, who has the final say here on when or if strikes stop on Iran. The Gulf states, they've put out words of condemnation about what Iran is doing. They also speaking to the Trump administration, though, and really trying to find a diplomatic solution still here.
Yeah, they're speaking to the Trump administration, and they have very, very good relations with.
There's nothing boring about this. Do you agree with that, Pete? I don't think there's anything, Mr. General. I think there's nothing boring about it. Somebody actually said from the media, I think you'll get bored after about a week or two. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I guarantee you that, to go through what I had to go through. We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership, and as you know, that was done in about an hour, so we're ahead of schedule there.
We have two guests from Washington, D.C. to discuss America's Iran offensive. Harlan Ullman is a former U.S. naval officer and a senior advisor in the Atlantic Council. And Ross Harrison is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and author of the book Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. Thanks so much for joining us. Ross, if we can go to you first. Did you get a sense that Donald Trump there has a clear game plan or a longer-term plan for actually what he wants to achieve right now?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction between a plan and a goal. I think he seems to have articulated a goal, though it moves a bit, and that is basically regime collapse or regime transition, regime change. But in terms of a plan of how to get there, I don't think they've thought that far ahead, frankly. I think part of the plan, part of the belief is that they can achieve regime collapse from the air militarily. And that remains to be seen. You might be able to cause a crack in the regime if the conflict lasts for a protracted period of time. But in terms of managing through a change process, that's pretty much impossible from the air. So no, I don't think there is a real strong plan for, should the regime collapse, how to transition, have a peaceful and stable transition to a new outcome. I don't think there's a plan there. If there is, we've seen no evidence of it.
Yeah, just on that point, Harlan, we've heard from Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth in the last few hours, and it doesn't seem like they're all on the same page. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Oh, the administration is in chaos. There was a briefing on the Hill to staffers in which the Pentagon said that there was no imminence of threat. And now that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and global energy is lacking access to about 20% of its petro supplies, this comes at a great surprise. It seems to me it was self-evident what Iran was going to do, and it would seem that the administration has been caught completely sleeping about all this, with Trump saying we want to negotiate with somebody in Tehran. And as I've noted before, we may come to regret the death of Khamenei, because right now Ali Ranjani is in charge, and this is a fairly competent guy. So I'm not sure if the administration fully has a plan yet of what it's going to do, whether it had one, and it seems to be already falling way behind in terms of what Iran is able to do in terms of its counteroffensive.
Yeah, Ross, just on that counteroffensive, we've obviously been seeing that the strategy from Iran doesn't seem to be that they're singularly targeting US bases in the Gulf region, but also now the energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia as well as here in Qatar, obviously designed to inflict as much economic pain, and not just regionally, but globally as well. Do you think that that is a sound strategy?
Well, I think given that the regime believes at this point that it has an existential threat, I think it believes that the risk of this kind of a strategy is lower than it was perhaps in the June war, where it was much more of a calibrated, measured response to US and Israeli attacks. So I think it's a sound strategy. I think it depends upon what the threshold of pain is for the United States and for Israel. I think Iranians are banking on the fact that at some point, the economic pain and possibly even the political pain, and then the prospects of more loss of life on the American and Israeli side will cause some kind of de-escalation and some reconfiguration of our approach to maybe even a readjustment of our goals as to what kind of outcome the United States is actually looking for.
Harlan, we've seen 6 US service members already killed in this conflict in the last couple of days. If, as Donald Trump says, this is going to go on for 4 or 5 weeks, that number is likely to rise. What sort of effect is that going to have on, I guess, how the US domestic viewers actually view this war?
Well, several points. First, the fact that there have been relatively few casualties so far, less than 600 in Iran reported, and about 150 of those were apparently girls at a girls' school. And so far the casualties are low. However, if there's a catastrophic attack on one of our ships and you have massive casualties, that will make a difference. But let me make 2 other points. Iran is now in a very interesting position because its bargaining chip is we will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. How do the Americans react to that? And if the Iranians really want to put the Gulf in complete chaos, they might attack the water supplies because, as I think people know, there's only about 4 days worth of water that's available in terms of reserves throughout the Gulf, and 95% of the water comes from desalination. Suppose Iran is going to attack those desalination plants. I'm not sure the administration considered that, but to answer your question, as long as the casualties are relatively low and there's not a catastrophic event, as there was in Beirut in October of 1983, when 241 American service personnel were killed, the toleration for pain will be, I think, acceptable in the United States, barring a cataclysmic effect.
Ross, just on that point, obviously Gulf countries are very nervous about what is occurring right now. They're speaking on a daily basis to the Trump administration to try and find a diplomatic off-ramp here. What leverage do they have to try and put pressure on Donald Trump at this point in time?
Well, it's not clear. I mean, before the conflict, we were told that the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris were working to urge caution and forestall this kind of military action, whereas the Israelis were basically shouting that now is the time, because of the weakness, the perceived weakness of the Islamic Republic at this moment. The Israelis were pushing for a military action. So it appears, if we can believe the reports, that the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris were working and trying to urge caution. We would assume that the Saudis, the Emiratis, were lost out to the Israelis. But as you know, in the last couple of days, there have been reports that the Saudis actually, publicly, they were pushing for diplomacy. Privately, they were urging Donald Trump to take advantage of the weakness of the Islamic Republic. So it's unclear what kind of leverage they have. I think right now, I think Harlan spoke to this before, and that is, I think the leverage is going to come in terms of pain. If, in fact, the pain is de minimis in terms of loss of life and economic disruption, then I think the United States and Israel can maintain its current course. And the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Gulf Arab states are not going to have much leverage in terms of stopping, because it's a lot easier to get into a war than it is to stop a war. So I don't think they're going to be able to forestall the next phase of this conflict. But I think the Iranians may be counting on this. If there's a compounding effect of economic pain, closing the Straits of Hormuz, if the Iranians can actually do that, and possibly greater loss of life, and then some kind of economic catastrophic kind of impact, either on the energy markets or on the global equity markets. I think then at that point, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Gulf Arabs may be able to have a louder voice than the Israelis. But at this point, I think it's the main dynamics are between Washington and Jerusalem.
Okay, Helen, just before we go, can you just give us an idea from a military perspective what you're looking for over the next day or two?
Well, I think we're running out of targets in Tehran and in Iran, and we're going to be lowering our magazine loads. So there's going to be an issue here of attrition. Over the next couple of days, I'm seeing raids, but then going to be stopped to get bomb damage assessment, and then to continue. But the issue right now is closing the strait is going to cause huge pressure. And if gasoline goes up to $3.50 a gallon, which it easily could in America, then I think you're going to see Trump trying to find some kind of negotiation to get his way out of this. And it may be the Houthi solution, where we just declare victory and pull away. But the consequences could be extreme. And I think, as Ross points out, we have underestimated what we've gotten into in the Gulf. And I'm afraid that's a great weakness in this administration of not anticipating what Donald Rumsfeld called the unknown unknowns that are part of warfare and the fog and friction of war.
Thank you so much, Harlan.
May I make one more comment? Is it possible?
Oh, yeah, quickly, Ross. Yes, you can.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think is important to understand is that if the Iranians cannot win militarily. So I think if they can hold on for the next couple of weeks and at least deny Israel and the United States from a victory, that is a win, even if they are depleting their military assets. So they don't have to win militarily. If the regime can survive and stay roughly intact, that is a victory for the Islamic Republic and a loss in many ways for the United States and Israel. How Donald Trump will portray that and spin it at that point, that remains to be seen. But I think that dynamic is an important one to look at.
Okay, thank you so much, Ross. Ross Harrison.
Correct.
And
right.
Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, but we do appreciate your insight. Harlan Ullman and Ross Harrison for us there.
Thank you.
Israel is carrying out another wave of strikes on Beirut. These are live pictures from the capital of Lebanon. We are going to go to Heidi Pett, who is live for us in Beirut. And what more do we know about what's been hit so far, Heidi?
So a very short while ago, the Israeli military's Arabic language spokesperson issued another warning to residents in Dahia, in the southern suburbs of Beirut, a forced evacuation order once again, indicating that they would be striking targets there in the very near future. And so we expect that these airstrikes that you're just seeing and hearing now are the result of that. Israeli media is reporting that they were planning to target the offices of Al-Mana, which is a local television station here. We don't yet have confirmation as to whether that has happened, whether these strikes that you've just seen are indeed that one, or whether there are further strikes to hit the capital of Lebanon tonight.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi. We will talk to you, no doubt, in the coming hours as the story develops. The Israeli military says it's begun a new wave of strikes on Tehran after issuing forced evacuation warnings for residents in parts of the capital. These are live pictures from Tehran now. We understand that Iranian state media say 2 explosions have been heard around the headquarters of its state broadcaster. The US Central Command says it's destroyed the headquarters of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, stating it has, quote, cut the head off the snake. But Iran's military structure is notably complex. The country has parallel armies, multiple intelligence services, and several command structures, all answering to the supreme leader. Ali Hashim explains how the institutions operate and why they are structured as they are.
Iran does not rely on a single military chain of command. Its security system is layered, duplicated, and intentional. At the top sits the supreme leader, the commander-in-chief of all armed forces. Below that authority are 2 parallel militaries, The Artesh, Iran's regular army, is responsible for territorial defense, borders, airspace, and conventional warfare. Alongside it, there's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, and its role goes beyond defense. Given its ideological structure, it's responsible for protecting the revolution politically and militarily. Within the IRGC, the Aerospace Force controls Iran's missile and drone arsenal. This forms the backbone of Iran's deterrence strategy against Israel and the United States. Iran avoids merging these forces by design. Duplication here is a safeguard against coups, internal threats, and sudden collapse. Inside the IRGC sits the Basij, a mass mobilization force used for internal security, crisis response, and ideological enforcement. Iran also maintains parallel intelligence services, while the two main branches remain the Ministry of Intelligence that follows the government and the IRGC intelligence unit. There are around 16 services that operate under the Council for Intelligence Coordination. Beyond its borders, Iran projects influence through a specialized force. The IRGC's Quds Force manages Iran's regional networks, including in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq, and previously Syria. It operates with tactical flexibility, but within limits set in Tehran. Military command is organized through separate entities known as Maqar. The Khatam al-Anbiya unit coordinates joint military operations during wartime and national emergencies, while the Muhammad Rasulullah bloc is responsible for defending Tehran and managing internal emergencies. Both the IRGC and the army maintain their own joint staffs. They coordinate. Above the battlefield sits the political security layer, the Supreme National Security Council, which brings together senior military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and political leaders to align national security policy. It coordinates strategy, but it does not replace military command. This system may appear complicated and fragmented, but this is done on purpose, and it's central to how Iran manages power. Even after the killing of senior IRGC commanders and joint staff figures, transitions have been orderly. Iran's military structure is built to absorb shock, but it's not clear yet whether it can adapt to faster and more complex changes. Ali Hashim, Al Jazeera.
US President Donald Trump on Monday again warned Americans without evidence that Iran was building a missile that could soon reach the United States. That's why he intends to continue attacking Iran. White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett reports.
Speaking for the first time from the White House since launching military strikes against Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump explained why he deployed U.S. forces.
This was our last best chance to strike.
At a medal ceremony honoring American soldiers, Trump laid out his objectives for the mission, dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
We're destroying Iran's missile capabilities. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Following U.S. strikes on Iran in June of 2025, Trump says Iran defied warnings to halt pursuing a nuclear weapon and was using its conventional ballistic missile program to shield nuclear ambitions. Trump also explained why he gave up on diplomacy.
We thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people.
Well, good morning.
Hours earlier, the defense secretary acknowledged there have been U.S. casualties. He explained how Iran broke through U.S. defenses, killing 4 soldiers.
Every once in a while, you might have one, unfortunately, we call it a squirter that makes its way through. And in that particular case, it happened to hit a tactical operations center.
And the chair of the Joint Chiefs cautioned there could be more deaths.
This is not a single overnight operation. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses.
President Trump insists combat operations are ahead of schedule. Still, he's not ruling out sending U.S. troops into Iran. He's also cautioned Americans that combat operations could last more than a month. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
It's 22 GMT and you're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. I'm Tom McRae with our continuing extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran, which is rapidly expanding across the region. Well, this hour, the Israeli military says it's begun a new wave of strikes in Tehran after issuing forced evacuation warnings for residents and parts of the capital. The warnings are focused on areas near major broadcasting headquarters. In Lebanon, residents in southern Beirut have also been told to leave ahead of expected military action. Well, this follows heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs earlier on Monday. The strikes came in response to a Hezbollah drone and rocket attack. At least 52 people were killed and more than 150 others wounded, according to officials. And there have also been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says it hit more than 70 Hezbollah targets, including weapons storage facilities. Israel launched the attacks early on Monday after the Iranian-backed group fired rockets into northern Israel in response to the assassination of Iran's supreme leader.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.
US President Donald Trump has defended his decision to attack Iran and said the military operation could last about 4 weeks. Trump said the US will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity and nuclear program. He said Washington is ahead of its time projections in the conflict, saying the US eliminated Iran's top leadership in just a matter of hours. And a day of escalation has seen Tehran target energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. And across the border in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom has shut its biggest domestic oil refinery as a precautionary measure. 2 drones targeted Aramco's Ras Tanura facility, but were intercepted. Okay, well, Al Jazeera is live right across the world in Ramallah, Doha, the Capitol Hill, the White House, as well as Beirut, where we go to first. Heidi Pett is standing by for us in the Lebanese capital. As we mentioned, there have been more strikes in the last half hour or so on Beirut. Can you just talk us through the very latest there?
Yeah, so in the last hour, there was another forced evacuation order for residents in the southern suburbs of Dahia, which is just the southern part of the capital here in Beirut. These strikes were evidently a little smaller, a little bit more limited. They weren't like the ones that we've been hearing earlier this evening, about 6 hours ago, and this morning, which shook the entire city. These ones were evidently a little bit smaller, but Israeli media, Channel 15, has been reporting they were planning on targeting the headquarters of a TV channel, which they say is associated with Hezbollah al-Manal. And so we are waiting for confirmation as to whether these strikes, these recent ones, are indeed the ones that have targeted the headquarters of a television station here in Beirut, or if that is still to come and we're expecting to see further strikes across the capital this evening.
Okay, Heidi, Israel's also saying it's killed the head of Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, just a short while ago, again, we get all of the news here in Beirut from the Arabic language spokespeople of the Israeli military. That's how people learn that they're supposed to leave their homes. It's how they learn whether or not people have been assassinated. It's the middle of the night here, and you've got a country that is glued to Twitter to find out what is going on and what the Israeli military has been up to. So they have just announced that in a strike earlier on Monday that they killed the leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad somewhere here in Beirut.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi. We will come back to you as and when we get some more information. Heidi Pett for us in Beirut. The Israeli military has conducted strikes across Tehran, saying this hour it has targeted the state media broadcaster. It follows a social media announcement for civilians to clear specific areas. Mohammed Val is in Tehran with more.
This is the new phase of this war. At the beginning, we have it limited to direct reciprocated strikes between the United States, Israel on the one hand, and Iran on the other hand, related to military facilities, either in the Gulf or here in Iran. But now we have seen this quick development of the war into a kind of war again, an energy war, because the Strait of Hormuz means energy, not only for the region, but for the international, for the whole world, because a huge percentage of international traffic of oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has been promising, or it has been threatening for several years now, that if it is attacked in this huge manner, it is going to close the Strait of Hormuz. And that's a part of a strategy to make the world feel the heat of this war and to make it clear that if Iran is attacked, then the world will bear the loss. The loss will be not only in Iran, but also across the region and the world. And that means high energy prices and so on. So now they are showing that they are true to their promise. They have announced the closing of the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, joining us now from Tehran is Fawad Azadi. He's a professor at the University of Tehran's Faculty of World Studies. Thanks for being with us once again. We'll get to the ramifications of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in just a moment. But first, we've been talking and seeing some pictures out of the capital there of more Israeli strikes. Understand it's on the state media complex. Can you just give us a bit of an update, if you have one, on what's happening there in the capital right now?
You know, I'm in Tehran. I'm at home. We're in the middle of the city. And we had heavy bombardment a few minutes ago. As you reported, the Israelis are hitting Iranian television stations. They did this last night as well. We had one of your colleagues, a journalist, killed last night. But tonight it's much heavier. And they have been trying to disrupt Iranian television stations. So the only source of information for Iranians are television stations run by the US government or the British government or the Pahlavi outlets. And they want to control the flow of information for propaganda purposes, which is very sad, but this is what we have tonight.
In the last couple of hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander has said that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Iran will set fire to any vessel that tries to pass through it. Can you just talk us through the ramifications of that decision?
You know, this is a war zone, and it would not be a good idea for ships to go through a war zone. Some of the vessels that are used on both sides sometimes go astray, and making sure that people are not hurt on these ships becomes important. So what Iran is saying is that staying away from the Strait of Hormuz until the US president decides to end its war of aggression against Iran would be a good idea.
Fawad, can you also talk a little bit about the new leadership in Iran since the supreme leader was killed? Do they currently have control over the Revolutionary Guards and the military? Who's making these decisions at this point in time, or where to strike and how to strike?
You know, because of the sophistication that both United States and Israeli militaries have, communicating with different cells, military cells, is a challenge because that's the best way of finding out where they are if you are the enemy. So before the start of the war, realizing that U.S. and Israel may attack Iran, they have made decisions on what needs to be done, and some of these decisions are trusted in local military leaders, and generally they may decide without instructions what needs to be done. This is the only way Iran could safeguard their ability to function. If they wanted to be on the phone all the time, that would be the way of finding where they are, and the U.S. and Israel would be able to kill them. And this is one reason Iran wanted to avoid a military confrontation with U.S. and Israel, because their militaries are stronger than Iranian militaries. So you don't want to be fighting with them. That's why Iran was interested in a diplomatic solution. That didn't happen. Trump wants to change Iran's government, and they have started the war. It is very sad. We have lost over 550 civilians already. And they're saying that they want to continue this war for a few weeks.
Indeed, 4 weeks, Donald Trump said a few hours ago. Now, in the latest interview that the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi gave, he said that Iran is not in a war with regional countries, but it's moved its targets from US bases in the Gulf to not only airports, but energy infrastructure, which we've seen productions shut down in Saudi Arabia, as well as here in Qatar. Is there a risk, though, that Iran is actually going to make enemies of its Gulf neighbors?
The hope that Iran has is that the Persian Gulf countries realize that Iran wants to have good relations with them. With countries like Oman or Qatar, Iran's relations has been good. You remember, I don't know if you were in Doha in 2017, but when Qatar faced the blockade from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Egypt, the borders were closed in west, east, and south of the country. North was the only way that they could travel, and it was Iran that helped Qatar. So there is this history of cooperation. The Qatari government was very helpful in trying to reach a diplomatic solution. We had the Amir going to Washington, doing basically what the Omani foreign minister was trying to do, avoid the war. And unfortunately, the war started against Iran. These American bases are located in these countries, and Iran cannot reach proper United States. So if they want to inflict cost to the United States, the only option Iran has is to hit these bases and wherever US soldiers are. So if they're in a hotel, that hotel would be a target. CIA headquarters would be a target. And some of these missiles are shut down. And when you shoot down a missile, the debris falls in places that were not intended to be hit. And that's Iran cannot do much about that.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Fawad Azadi for us in Tehran. Well, the Trump administration has responded to growing pressure to clarify its objectives in the conflict. Mike Hanna is joining us from Washington, D.C. Mike, we've heard President Trump talk about how long the war is going to go on, potentially 4 or 5 weeks. But can you just outline exactly what he said about what the United States wants to achieve here?
Well, his phrase was 4 weeks or more this conflict is expected to carry on. He says that it will continue until the U.S. achieves its objectives. Well, what are its objectives? That's the question that many have been asking in recent days. And President Trump did address this in a sentence, and this is what he had to say.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
It's important to note that this was the first time that President Trump has addressed the U.S. public live. This was a medal ceremony being held at the White House, but his previous comments to the American public have been via pre-recorded videos put out on his social media channel. So this is the first time the American people have heard him speaking live about the decision that he took.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike Hanna, for us there at the White House. We're going to go to Patty Calhoun, who's also in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also been speaking in the last couple of hours. Can you just give us a rundown of what he said and what was a relatively combative media conference?
Yes, it was definitely. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is walking into the secure room where he's going to be briefing, or he is currently briefing, the Gang of Eight, as they're called. Those are the top leaders, both Republican and Democrat, on key national security committees. He was a bit defensive. And again, as Mike just mentioned, the question has been repeatedly posed to these officials, what is the objective? And he basically said, I don't know how hard this is for you to figure out. Let me tell you this again. He went on to say some of the justification, and some of it was a bit new. He talked about that the U.S. believed Israel was going to strike Iran and that Iran's response would be to strike U.S. targets. He didn't bring up the fact that if the U.S. didn't want Israel to strike Iran, it had some leverage. And then he did say that they needed to make sure Iran didn't cross, in his words, the line of immunity. He said in a year to year and a half, the U.S. was afraid that Iran would have so many missiles, so many drones, that nobody would be able to target them or their nuclear program. So that's a bit of a new justification. He also said that the goals, getting back to the goal is to, as the president just said, get rid of the Navy and also make sure that missile facilities are destroyed. And he also had a pretty dire warning for the Iranian people.
The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics, as I've said myself repeatedly for years. I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now.
Patty, obviously we heard Marco Rubio there. We've also heard Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump all speak in the last few hours. Are they all on the same page, though? Because there has been some criticism, hasn't there, that there's a lack of clarity from the Trump administration at this point.
Well, and that's the thing. If you look at the history of this country, Donald Trump came to office saying, if you elect Kamala Harris, there'll be World War III. He promised that the U.S. would stay out of foreign wars. And that is the big, real question here in Washington. That's why you hear them talk about days, weeks, not, a shorter time. And Pete Hegseth said that this isn't a forever war because Americans don't want this. They don't want another military invasion in the Middle East. They've learned their lessons from Iraq, from Afghanistan, where, again, the pretext was that the U.S. was at risk, but it turned out, in fact, the U.S. was not at risk from Iraq. So they're trying to tamp down expectations of just how long this will take, because this move has been very unpopular. 1 in 4 Americans agree with this decision. Even some Republicans now saying in polls that they believe Donald Trump is too quick to use force.
Okay, thank you so much, Patty. As always, we do appreciate it. Patty Calhoun for us on Capitol Hill. Joining us from Washington, D.C. now is Adam Clements. He's a former Pentagon official. Thanks very much for being with us. Again, Adam, we've seen the number of the U.S. service members killed rise to 6. I mean, we're only 3 or 4 days into this conflict. Is that to be expected? And what's your response to how Donald Trump and the administration has handled that aspect of this conflict?
Thank you, Tom. I think any time that any military in the world conducts such operations that are ongoing right now, I think there's some type of understanding of what could happen. This could be from our service members in the Air Force, or as you've seen in some of the retaliatory attacks on the ground, or Navy. So I think it's a hard question to answer because you always anticipate this could be a problem. Military planners, of course, anticipate what costs could be in both personnel, material, and other things. But this is the story as well of what I think you've been discussing with others before I've come on for the interview of the administration clearly articulating the justification and reason why this operation is worth American blood and treasure. And that's what always has to be clearly defined. And I realize that the administration, several officials have tried to clarify that a little bit better in the past few hours. But I still think there's a lot of uncertainty, or a lot of these objectives are still the strategic end state, let's say, it's still, I think, a big question mark for me.
Why do you think that is? Obviously, there's been talk of this happening, the US striking Iran for weeks, if not months. So why do you think there is that ambiguity around exactly what the United States is wanting to achieve?
Well, I think it'd be natural in any type of military operation, no matter what administration, Republican or Democrat, will be in the White House, that there'd be some type of ambiguity that no one in the Pentagon, in the White House, the State Department, at U.S. combatant command around the world will give away everything. But I do think, though, however, at the same time, there have to be clearly stated goals, not only to the U.S. public of why an administration is going about conducting such a military operation, to the U.S. Congress. So I think it's a little both. And so perhaps we're seeing a little bit of catching up here of the administration trying to catch up to its messaging. And so that's maybe some things we'll see also in the coming days. But there's still, as I said, I think there's still some ambiguity strategically of what it is exactly the U.S. wants to achieve, because the Defense Secretary, Hegseth, has walked back some of the comments that Trump said himself about some type of regime change. So the regime change, rather.
But also, Marco Rubio did say, though, that the US is not postured for ground forces in Iran at this moment, but President Donald Trump has those options open to him. What did you make of a comment like that? Obviously, something that up until this point had all but been ruled out by the Trump administration.
Well, I think the administration, just as I said, any administration, any military operation will leave that open. I will just say as well, just have to look at a map as far as the logistics of what would be required from anything from a major ground operation to something more limited, to something more precise that we saw in Venezuela. But the logistics in Iran are much more difficult as there were in Venezuela. So I think it's difficult to compare apples to apples, if you will, using that term for there. So I still think that there's a lot in the air campaign and destroying some of infrastructure and Iran's Navy capabilities that I think would probably seem to be the current priorities.
Okay, Adam, thank you so much. We'll leave it there for the moment. We do appreciate it, though. Adam Clements for us, former Pentagon official out of Washington, D.C. Well, the conflict is affecting energy prices. European gas prices have surged by around 35% after Qatar's state-run energy company halted LNG liquefied natural gas production. Now, the suspension follows Iranian attacks on two major facilities. Qatar shares the world's largest natural gas reservoir with Iran. Oil prices are also up. Brent crude was trading at about $82 a barrel on Monday. That's the highest since January last year and up 13% from Friday's close. Well, here's a look at the energy installations and transport facilities Iran has targeted so far. Explosions were reported at Ras Laffan industrial city in Qatar. It houses two major LNG refineries as well as energy processing infrastructure. The Ras Tanura plant in Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil refineries. It handles more than 500,000 barrels a day. And in Dubai, debris from an attack fell near Jebel Ali port, disrupting energy and logistics operations there. In the Gulf of Oman, a projectile hit an oil tanker transporting crude, while another tanker caught fire after an attack in the Strait of Hormuz. The head of the IRGC says it will attack any ships trying to pass the critical shipping lane. We're going to cross now to Axel Zajmovic, who is here for us in Doha. And as I'm reading through that, that's a growing list of targets. So how much has concern grown now in the region in the aftermath of these attacks on energy infrastructure in Qatar, Saudi, and the UAE?
Quite concerning, Tom, because we have a situation now we're not seeing only U.S. military bases targeted, but also energy infrastructure. You explain what happened in Qatar, two different attacks in the region, one Qatar, one Saudi Arabia. What happened in Qatar? We see that they stopped producing liquefied natural gas, and prices already reacted across Europe, across Asia. And in Saudi Arabia, neighboring Saudi Arabia, we also see that they are shutting down some of the units there. But what's really unsettling here in this situation is the question of what's next. So if we see Iran targeting this energy infrastructure across the region, the calculation here has changed. And now we're talking about the region that's significant for producing one of the largest energy supplies across the world. So Qatar is producing LNG, and that natural gas is being fed into European homes, the global markets, global supply chains. Saudi Arabia is shipping millions of barrels of oil every single day. So any disruption, if it continues, it doesn't just stay here. So it grows, and it definitely will affect the rest of the world.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Axel Zajmovic in Doha. Well, Iran has targeted sites across Israel. The Israeli military says missiles were intercepted above West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Eilat. At least 10 people have been killed since Saturday. Juanita Ibrahim is joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and strikes are going both ways. We've heard in the last hour that Israel is hitting both Lebanon and Tehran. What more has Israeli leadership said about both of those?
Well, they are continuing to say that they will continue their strikes not only in Iran, targeting the media channels, including the main TV station, saying that they will also target Al Manar TV station in Lebanon. This is a Hezbollah affiliated news channel. And they are also talking about another warning, an early warning that came just now, targeting the northern side of Israel, the northern areas. We don't know yet whether this missile is being fired from Lebanon or from Iran, but we know that we are expecting sirens to be sounding off in the northern part of Israel soon. In general, there are talks in Israeli media about a success, an operational success, if you may, by eliminating the head of the Iranian regime. We're talking about Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. So there's a lot of military success as far as the political analysts in Israel are concerned. But there are also many questions that are being raised about the scope of the war, about the ability for the population to handle such heavy strikes. Again, we don't know the scope and the impact of many of these strikes, as Israel keeps saying that they intercepted them. But from previous experience, Israel does not fulfill its duties to the people, let's say, and does not really tell the audience and the public the true reality of the damage that has been incurred through or by these Iranian missiles. And as we've seen in the past war in June, there have been so many leaks about potential damages that were caused to military sites and military areas that were not disclosed to the population. Now, again, I guess the key question is how much more can Iran send? How much more missiles can they direct towards Israel? And that will probably give us a guideline or give us an indication, really, about the future of this war and how it's going to end and when.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Nita Ibrahim, for us there in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. This hour, the Israeli military says it's begun a new wave of strikes on Tehran after issuing forced evacuation warnings for residents in parts of the capital. Iran's state media is reporting explosions around major broadcasting headquarters after Israeli warnings. In Lebanon, Israel has carried out heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs after ordering forced evacuations for residents earlier on Monday. At least 52 people were killed and more than 150 others wounded, according to officials. The strikes came in response to a Hezbollah drone and rocket attack on Israel. And Iran has targeted energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. Iranian attacks on Qatari gas and Saudi oil facilities have forced their closure, raising the possibility of the worst energy crisis the world has seen in decades. As the death toll rises and economic damage worsens, diplomacy to avert disaster becomes more and more urgent. Osama bin Javed reports from Brussels.
This is Ras Tadura, Saudi Arabia's largest domestic oil refinery, after a drone strike. It's now shut down and no longer producing 550,000 barrels a day. Drones also hit Qatar's Ras Laffan complex and Mesaid industrial zone. That stopped Qatar's LNG production, effectively wiping off about 20% of global supply. Qatar Energy's majority clients are from Asia, and it's set to declare force majeure on its LNG and petrochemical shipments. Explosions were reported on Iran's Kharg Island, which handles 90% of Iran's crude exports. In addition, companies in Iraqi Kurdistan and Israel's Leviathan gas field have also suspended production. The EU's warning of far-reaching consequences as Iran's attacks and the US-Israeli assaults continue.
From energy to nuclear, from transport to migration to security, we must be prepared for the fallout from these recent events.
All this as one of the world's major supply corridors, the Strait of Hormuz, remains closed by Iran. Peter Chase is a former US diplomat who witnessed the 1970s energy crisis. He says a prolonged conflict and closed shipping lanes could have major reverberations.
So the prices of energy long term, if they are raised long term, that will have a large impact on the European economy. I would have another look at this issue of their imports and exports and their overall trade with Asia, because that is the area that's most affected by this.
Rising attacks on energy facilities, major supply routes being shut, and shockwaves through the energy markets is being seen as a perfect financial storm. And if the United States and Iran do not stop the war soon, the entire world is likely to have to pay for it. Osama bin Javed, Jazeera, Brussels.
Iran's foreign minister says Tehran doesn't want to escalate tensions with countries in the region.
We are not fighting our neighboring countries. We are fighting American forces that are based in these countries, and the Americans and Israelis who are attacking us in every way, day and night. For the American bases in the region to move their soldiers to, for example, a hotel, it's natural that this causes an issue. We will use every method to defend our people. Our enemies attack us in many different ways, and we will do the same. In our view, this is not a regional war. This is a war between Iran and the U.S. that is unfortunately spread in the region.
Okay, we're going to go to Tawhid Asadi, who is standing by for us in Tehran. And Tawhid, we know Israel warned of a new wave of strikes there in the capital. Can you just give us an update of what's happening there right now?
Well, I was out a short while ago driving through downtown, and I can say that the scene is dominated by 3 elements: the smoke that was drifting through the air, as well as the lingering echo of several explosions, and of course, the concern and anxiety among some people who were rushing out of their houses at the time being. Also, we know that based on the latest reports, the complex related to the state TV IRIB was attacked. We saw thick smoke from the footages coming out of that complex, even though the head of IRIB came out to say that he doesn't have any update about the casualties, but we may expect casualties, seeing the scope and the sounds of explosions that we heard
from the scene. Also, the latest update is that until the moment that we are speaking, the broadcasting of the channels related to IRIB is still ongoing. And of course, this is not just limited to that. Initial reports following the past 1 hour or so said that at least 8.8 places in the Iranian capital were targeted, even though after those reports we heard continuous sounds of explosion, which means that there are several more points. And on that, we know that the former building of the Iranian parliament, not the current one, was also said to be targeted, as well as we've got other reports about a building belonging to the Expediency Council of the country in Mir Damad, which is said to be also attacked in Valiasr Street, which is the longest street of the capital. There are several reports of explosions taking place as a sign of course, the continuation of the American and Israelis strikes on Iran. And of course, again, in the capital, we've got other reports on different locations being targeted, but that does not stop there. Obviously, in Karaj, also a city which is located in the western part of Iranian capital, also reports are coming about the massive sounds of explosions being heard in other cities such as Qom and Dezful. In Dezful, it has been reported that the radio station belonging to IRIB is hit by these strikes. And of course, this is a very critical ongoing situation, an ongoing development, and we, from time to time, starting from, I would say, 1 or 2 hours ago, can hear the sounds of massive explosion. Again, as I was explaining, the smell of the smoke is drifting through the air. It was quite tangible when I was coming to the bureau on my way in different parts of the city. And added to that was the buildings, some of them belonging to the political centers, some of them belonging to police stations, and some of them belonging to ordinary citizens, were actually damaged, in some cases demolished. And that is the continuation of the attacks that started. And now we see this continuation of these attacks.
Tawhid, also, we've seen in the last hour or so the Iran Revolutionary Corps Guard say that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, that it will fire on any ships going through there. Can you just talk us through the repercussions of that decision from them?
Well, it's a part and parcel of Iran's retaliatory actions, and it is something that they warned about even before the initiation of these strikes. They said that this is a possibility that is being seriously considered. We have to keep in mind that right now we have the reports about the 13th wave of the IRGC's retaliatory actions targeting the Israeli territories as well as the American bases in the region, with every time with new weaponries. And a part of that strategy, of course, was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That is a strategically significant choke point, seeing the transfer of oil and then the commercial aspect of that, and of course the military aspect of that as well. Right now, Iran says that it is closing it, and this is just part of their strategy to deal with this situation. And of course, the continuation of Iranian strikes on U.S. military bases is something that is said to be still happening. On that, we've got reports about downing of U.S. fighters, downing of U.S. drones, and of course, hitting missiles at the bases in the region.
Okay, thank you so much, Tawhid Asadi, there for us in Tehran. I'm going to go to Gabriel Elizondo, who is at the UN for us. And Gabe, can you just give us an idea of how Iran is justifying attacking its neighbors? Because I can tell you, just in the last few minutes, there have been another 5 or 6 huge booms that we could feel right through our newsroom here. So what's Iran been saying there at the UN?
Iran's ambassador to the UN, Amir Saeed Iravani, held a media stakeout here behind me. He was asked that very question: what is the rationale for attacking neighboring countries in the Gulf? And he denied it. He said, "We are not attacking neighboring countries. We are defending ourselves," he said. We are targeting the facilities, bases, and assets of the U.S. in the region. That is the message from Tehran, and that is the message from their ambassador here at the UN. They simply deny that they are at war with neighboring countries or that they are specifically targeting civilian infrastructure. Now, this is a little bit more of what Iran's ambassador had to say.
Iran does not seek war. Iran does not seek escalation, but Iran will not surrender its sovereignty. The issue before the international community is clear. Can a powerful state attack another sovereign member of the United Nations with impunity? If the answer is yes, then the charter is meaningless. If the answer is no, then this aggression must be condemned and stopped.
Okay, Gabe, what is Iran saying about potential talks? Is there any chance of a diplomatic solution here?
Well, he certainly left the door open, but there was no talk about any sort of immediate return to the negotiating tables. I think you heard from the Iranian ambassador saying that they are essentially defiant, defending themselves. And he said that Iran was no immediate threat to anybody and that Iran was at the negotiating table, but it was the United States for the second time, he said, that had closed the door to any sort of diplomacy. And he said that the talks that they were in with the U.S. were, in his words, very serious talks. But of course, that is now all over.
Okay, thank you so much, Gabriel Elizondo, for us there at the UN. US President Donald Trump on Monday again warned Americans without evidence that Iran was building a missile that could soon reach the United States. That's why he intends to continue attacking Iran for as long as it takes to ensure Iran never builds a nuclear weapon. A White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, reports.
Speaking for the first time from the White House since launching military strikes against Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump explained why he deployed U.S. forces.
This was our last best chance to strike.
At a medal ceremony honoring American soldiers, Trump laid out his objectives for the mission, dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
We're destroying Iran's missile capabilities. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Following U.S. strikes on Iran in June of 2025, Trump says Iran defied warnings to halt pursuing a nuclear weapon and was using its conventional ballistic missile program to shield nuclear ambitions. Trump also explained why he gave up on diplomacy.
We thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people.
Well, good morning.
Hours earlier, the defense secretary acknowledged there have been U.S. casualties. He explained how Iran broke through U.S. defenses, killing 4 soldiers.
Every once in a while, you might have one, unfortunately, we call it a squirter that makes its way through. And in that particular case, it happened to hit a tactical operations center.
And the chair of the Joint Chiefs cautioned there could be more deaths.
This is not a single overnight operation. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses.
President Trump insists combat operations are ahead of schedule. Still, he's not ruling out sending U.S. troops into Iran. He's also cautioned Americans that combat operations could last more than a month. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Well, as we mentioned a little earlier, residents in southern Beirut have been told to leave ahead of military action by Israel. This follows heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs earlier on Monday. Now, the strikes came in response to a Hezbollah drone and rocket attack. At least 52 people were killed and more than 150 others wounded, according to officials. Heidi Pett is live for us in Beirut. And Heidi, I understand there's been more strikes there in Beirut this evening. Can you just talk us through exactly what's been happening in the last half hour or so?
Yeah, we're here in downtown Beirut, so what strikes there have been in the last half hour have clearly been a little bit more limited because the ones that we were hearing earlier this evening and across today were shaking the entire city. These are a little bit smaller, but people are still on watch, waiting and watching to see what is going to happen after the Israeli military has ordered these forced displacement orders, not just for the southern suburbs of Beirut, but just before midnight. They issued forced displacement orders for more than 30 villages in southern Lebanon. That's in addition to more than 50 locations from this morning. And so the scale of displacement for Lebanon's civilian population is huge as this war continues to expand. Now, just in the last couple of minutes, Hezbollah has actually issued a statement. This comes after the Lebanese Prime Minister today basically outlawed any military action by the group. He's restricting them to a more political role, saying that that Lebanon maintains the right to make these kinds of decisions. And just in the last few minutes, we've got a statement that has come in from Hezbollah saying that we have repeatedly warned that aggression without response cannot continue and that assassinations and destruction cannot continue. And they're saying that what is required is to put an end to the aggression by all available means with determination and effective action. And so people here are now on watch, not just for these incoming Israeli missiles and airstrikes, but whether there is going to be further action by Hezbollah this evening or into tomorrow.
Okay, thanks for that, Heidi. Can you also just give us a bit of context around this? What's led up to this point? Because it comes after Israel also hit southern Lebanon earlier.
Yeah, there's been widespread strikes across Lebanon for a little more than the last 24 hours. It began just before 3 o'clock in the morning last night with significant strikes on Dahia in Beirut's southern suburbs. And those ones came with no warning. People were asleep in their beds or perhaps just waking up for sahur, in order to prepare to fast because it is the middle of Ramadan here. And then across the course of the day, we saw those strikes expanding. So southern Lebanon, and also sites in the Bekaa towards the Syrian border in the east of the country. And yes, we've seen 52 people killed. The Lebanese government has announced 154 people injured. Among the dead, Israel says, is a senior leader of Hezbollah's intelligence wing. And in terms of the civilian death toll and what the breakdown is there, we're not quite yet sure, but the impact is being clearly felt across the country as people are once again fleeing in the face of bombing or these forced displacement orders.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Heidi. Heidi Pett for us in Beirut. An emergency meeting has been held at the International Atomic Energy Agency. It follows concerns over US and Israeli actions toward Iran in recent days. The IAEA says nuclear facilities haven't been targeted in the same way they were last June. Bernard Smith reports from Vienna.
So Russia and Iran called for this emergency meeting of the IAEA because they want its board to address what they call the unprovoked acts of armed aggression by Israel and the US on Iran.
It is for the second time that they invade our countries during negotiations. Today, we are supposed to hold technical meetings here in Vienna. Based on such deceptions and unfounded allegations, they targeted or peaceful, safeguarded nuclear facilities.
The Iranians say that one of its facilities at Natanz has been targeted again, although the IAEA's Director General says he's seen no evidence that attacks on the scale of those last June have been carried out this time.
We haven't seen major military activity targeting the nuclear facilities. We have been looking at different satellite images. There might be something there, but not significant.
The IAEA says Iran has 4 declared uranium enrichment facilities, but it has lost continuity of knowledge about stockpiles. There's 440 kilos of enriched uranium at 60%. It takes just a small technical step to get it to 90% and weapons grade. The IAEA has no one on the ground in Iran. It needs to know where that uranium is. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Vienna.
Okay, we're going to go back to Axel Zajmovic, who is standing by for us in Doha. And Axel, maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, if that long, there was a rolling booms that we felt here in the newsroom. I'm sure that you felt them out there. Can you just bring us up to date? Do we have any details about exactly what has happened?
Well, Tom, you're right. Like throughout the night, we've been hearing Qatari's army helicopters swirling overhead. But as you said not long ago, what we know so far, there's several loud bangs coming from the direction. So I'm not quite sure whether was it a drone or a missile approaching and was it taken down. But what we saw was a trail of that object going down, falling on the city, and it was intercepted. So that's the information what we have right now, but we're still waiting official confirmation from the authorities here to get a clearer picture of what really happened.
Yeah, Axel, can you just talk to us a little bit about how the Qatari military is actually taking down these missiles and drones further out to sea rather than with its surface-to-air defense systems?
Well, since the conflict started, we've seen that Qatar has been deploying the Patriot system that seems to be very effective in taking down missiles and drones coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. But also from Sunday, we've seen that the Qatari officials have also decided to deploy army jets flying around and trying to take that fight outside the coastline. They want to take it offshore because they want to minimize the risk of debris falling down. And that's what we saw tonight as well, that we saw that these planes have been flying really low, helicopters been swirling around, and that's the strategy that the Defense Ministry, we also got a confirmation from them, they are trying to utilize these strategies to minimize any potential risk for the civilian population across the city.
Thank you so much. That's Axel Zajmovic there for us in Doha. Well, for a third day, Iran has continued its attacks right across the region. US bases, ports, and energy facilities have all been targeted. Kulsum Sharif reports.
Iran has continued to attack several areas right across the Gulf. Energy facilities have come under attack. Now, these are the energy facilities that have taken a hit. We've seen an oil refinery in Kuwait, one in Saudi Arabia. We've seen oil ports in Oman, the UAE, and facilities in Qatar that have taken a hit. Here's a look at what's happened in Saudi Arabia. An Iranian drone was intercepted at a major oil refinery. The concern is the falling debris and the damage that it can cause. So here's what's happened here. The Aramco Ras Tanura oil refinery had a fire. It was contained, but authorities decided to shut the biggest domestic oil refinery as a precaution. Now in Qatar, we're seeing two facilities that have also come under attack. The Ras Laffan oil refinery and the Maisi power plant. Now, Qatar Energy, the state-owned petroleum company, says it has stopped complete production of liquefied natural gas and other products because of these attacks. Now, this is important because it can have global ramifications when it comes to gas supplies. Qatar is one of the biggest producers of LNG, and it operates the biggest gas field along with Iran. This is not Dome South Pass, and this area closer to Qatar is what it operates. And this area closer to Iran is operated by Tehran. But there's no production happening right now. We also spoke of the oil tankers that have been hit on March 1st in the Strait of Hormuz, an important passageway. An oil tanker took a hit. There's a fire on board. People were injured. And another ship was hit in the Gulf of Oman. One person has been killed. Now, the US, 6 Arab and Gulf states have condemned the repeated Iranian drone and missile attacks. They've reaffirmed their right to self-defense.
I'm going to go to Paddy Culhane, who is at Capitol Hill, where the Secretary of State has been speaking a little earlier. We've also understand that the State Department has put out a statement urging all Americans to leave the Gulf region as soon as possible.
Well, that's normally what you would see when they make that advisory, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a tweet from the Assistant Secretary of State, Maura Namdar, and basically these are the list of countries she says Americans should make their way out of these countries using commercial transportation from Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, UAE, and Yemen. So basically the entire region. And when we asked the State Department, is this official State Department policy, they referred us back to the tweet. And I can tell you that some of the Americans in the newsroom in Doha, they normally would have gotten a notification that the country, that the U.S. thinks it's time for you to leave. That hasn't happened. So the fact that the State Department is referring us to a tweet from an Assistant Secretary of State, and this isn't necessarily official policy, but perhaps they're saying it is official policy. This is not at all how it is usually done. Not quite clear exactly what this means and exactly how any Americans could leave the entire Middle East, since commercial traffic has been interrupted so much because of all of the missiles and all of the air traffic. That said, this is a developing story. We're going to try and figure out exactly what it means. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, we believe, has left Capitol Hill, but this is going to be a very big question, especially for all the Americans in the Middle East. Is this a policy, or is this just an Assistant Secretary of State making a recommendation on Twitter?
Yeah, it seems like more It seems like more confusion, Patty. We're just getting a couple of new lines into the newsroom. The United Arab Emirates says its air defenses are dealing with a new barrage of ballistic missiles from Iran. That's from its defense ministry. We also heard and felt a barrage of booms here in Qatar as well in the last 10 or 15 minutes. Obviously, there's many Americans live in the Gulf. Many more would have been flying through and have been stuck here since the airspace has been shut for days now and doesn't really show any signs with Iranian attacks continuing of reopening anytime soon. How big a concern is that for the Trump administration?
Well, this really hasn't been a priority for the Trump administration. They put out some signals in the run-up to this that this might happen. We haven't seen them take any steps to actually help Americans get out of the region. And again, we still don't know if this is the official policy of the U.S. government, because it's not being done through official channels. It's being done by an Assistant Secretary of State on social media. I think the bigger concern for this president is, as you see these attacks in the Middle East, as you see them drive gas prices up, as you see them the stock market have issues, this is not a popular action. 1 in 4 Americans said that they agreed that they're happy that the U.S. president attacked Iran. So obviously, he is going to be under increasing pressure as this starts to impact Americans here at home. He's already unpopular because everything is so expensive, that there is an affordability crisis in this country, which he seems to deny is happening. So we heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio that they expected some of these disruptions to the energy supply and that they'd be announcing something tomorrow from the Department of Energy. They do have the strategic stockpile that they can release from. In the past, that's really never been able to drive gas prices down more than a few pennies. And we're expecting to see a pretty marked increase in the price of gas in this country, especially when it comes to diesel gas. And diesel gas is obviously what fuels the economy, because it powers the trucks that move goods all around the country. And people are going to see it. And this is why politicians worry so much about the price of gasoline, because you see the billboards every time you drive down the street. Every gas station has a display that changes that says the price of a gallon of gas. It's already been seen to be too high. This is going to obviously raise prices. Just how much is going to matter, because it'll affect how much the American public can take.
Thank you so much, Patty. Patty Culhane for us there on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. It's 23 GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. I'm Tom McRae with our continuing extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran, which is rapidly expanding right across the region. Israeli strikes in Tehran and southern Beirut are ongoing at this hour. More than 600 people, including dozens of civilians, have been killed in both Iran and Lebanon since the start of the war. In Lebanon, Israel has carried out heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs of Beirut. Israel has been ordering forced evacuations for residents in several parts of the country. At least 52 people were killed and more than 150 others wounded, according to officials. Now, the strikes came in response to a Hezbollah drone and rocket attack on Israel. There have also been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.
US President Donald Trump has defended his decision to attack Iran and said the military operation could last about 4 weeks. Trump said the US will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity and nuclear program. The day of escalation has seen Tehran target energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, that's LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. The move is to draw the region in and extract an economic cost for major powers that have largely stood behind the US and Israel. Al Jazeera is live in Doha, Capitol Hill, the White House, and Beirut. But first, we're going to speak to Tawhid Asadi, who is in Tehran. Tawhid, as we've been talking about, there's been a new wave of strikes there in the capital. Do we have an idea of what damage they have done?
Well, actually, over the past 2 hours, starting, I may say, from the midnight, we have been witnessing a new wave of massive explosions as a result of the continuation of the Israeli and American strikes in the Iranian capital, Tehran, and also across the country in different cities. And I can say, compared to the previous nights, it seems to be much heavier than before. And on that, we've got several reports. But speaking of the entirety of the context, I can say that the smoke of the smell is felt drifting into air. As I'm speaking, even at the bureau, we can just feel it. And of course, the echo of lingering explosions, massive explosions that is being heard from time to time over the past 1-2 hours. And of course, anxiety and concern among the people as these strikes are going further and further. But speaking of the damages, we know that the state TV IRIB complex was targeted. We saw footages showing thick smoke coming out of the scene. The head of IRIB just came out a couple of minutes ago saying that he doesn't have any updates about the casualties. However, seeing the scope, it might be anticipated that there might be fatalities on that, but it is not the only place. The initial reports said that at least 8 places were targeted in the Iranian capital, but more explosions happened after that. We know that the building of the Expediency Council, which is one of the most important political bodies of the Iranian political establishment, is said to be targeted.
And Tawhid, the death toll continues to rise. More than 600 now confirmed to have been killed since the start of this conflict.
Well, actually, speaking of the casualties, both civilian and military, it's early to jump into any definitive conclusion. But one of the tragic scenes goes to the Minab, where an elementary school was targeted in the very initial parts of these strikes, and of course, leaving more than 160 girl students killed. And that doesn't stop there. We have also reports from different sources. Last night, it was in Nilufar Square, which was targeted, a civilian area in which at least they're saying that 20 people were killed. But today, we've got more reports from different cities, such as Isfahan, and elsewhere about more and more casualties as a result of the continuation of these strikes. And we have to keep in mind that it is not just the military headquarters or the political centers or police stations that are being hit, but also the civilian and residential areas, specifically those in the vicinity of those targeted places, are also being impacted. We saw, and I personally saw footages, and I personally saw the scenes of the buildings belonging to very ordinary people, some of them damaged, some of them even fully demolished, and that is showing the depths of the disastrous situation that is being felt here in Tehran and in other cities across the country.
Okay, thanks so much, Tohid, for all of that. Tohid Asadi for us there in Tehran. Well, as we mentioned earlier, in Lebanon, Israel has carried out heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs of Beirut. There have also been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says it hit more than 70 Hezbollah targets, including weapons storage facilities. Israel launched the attacks early on Monday after the Iranian-backed group fired rockets into northern Israel in response to the assassination of Iran's supreme leader. Well, Heidi Pett is live for us in Beirut. And Heidi, as we said, there's been more strikes there this evening. Can you just talk us through what, if any, damage we know that they've caused?
It's still not clear what damage has been caused by the strikes this evening, and we're actually waiting for the results of a further forced evacuation warning by the Israeli military for residents in Dahia, a couple of specific buildings. Israeli media is reporting that they're planning on striking the headquarters of a local TV channel here. We, along with the residents of Beirut, are watching and waiting to see if there will be further impacts this evening. There was a large round of strikes a couple of hours ago in Dahia, which shook the entire city. And we're also seeing strikes throughout the day, throughout the morning, across southern Lebanon, across the Bekaa. And Israeli media, Channel 12, is actually reporting a ground incursion towards the town of Khiam in southern Lebanon right now.
Heidi, we also heard that Israel said it's killed the head of Islamic Jihad. Has there been any confirmation, though, of that?
Not at this stage. What we have is the word of the Israeli military. They have made this announcement. They've said that they have killed the head of Islamic Jihad in a strike earlier on Monday on Beirut. We haven't yet had any confirmation from people within Palestinian Islamic Jihad or indeed any other sources in Lebanon as to whether or not that is true. But the pattern that we have seen, with the number of these assassinations, whether it is of leaders of Hezbollah or indeed in Iran, is that the rumors begin to circulate. Sometimes the Israeli military makes an announcement, and it can take some time until that is confirmed. And once it is, of course, we'll update you once we know for sure.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi. Heidi Pett for us there in Beirut. The US Congress is conducting a war powers debate over President Donald Trump's authority to bomb Iran. At least 6 US military personnel have already been killed in the conflict. Well, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said he was very satisfied with the briefing and gave more details on the rationale.
The most critical point is that this was a defensive measure, a defensive operation. And why is that? I took some notes, and this is not classified, so I'll tell you what I think is important. Israel was determined to act in their own defense here, with or without American support. Why? Because Israel faced what they deemed to be an existential threat. Iran was building missiles at a radical and a rapid clip to the point where our allies in the region could not keep up. As you know, Iran has long vowed to take out Israel, wipe it off the map, and they have long seen that as a critical threat to their very existence. Because Israel was determined to act with or without the U.S., our commander-in-chief and the administration and the officials I just named had a very difficult decision to make. They had to evaluate the threats to the U.S., to our troops, to our installations, to our assets in the region and beyond. And they determined, because of the exquisite intelligence that we had, that if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then they would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets. We have troops in harm's way, and we have many Americans in the region, and that was of great concern. If we had waited for all of those eventualities to take place, the consequences of inaction on our part could have been devastating.
I'm going to go to Paddy Culhane, who is on Capitol Hill, where the briefing was taking place. Paddy, earlier we heard from Marco Rubio before he gave the Congress, or some members of Congress, that update, that briefing. Can you just give us an idea of what he said? Because it was quite a robust debate with the media, wasn't it?
It was quite combative, but I really want to take a step back before I will get to Secretary of State Marco Rubio in a moment. He did say that the same thing that Speaker Johnson just said, that Iran was going to act, and so the U.S. would have been more vulnerable. So that's why they had to act. But Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, right there, was very specific. He said Israel was going to strike with us or without us, and so we had to act. This is going to become a point of contention because Democrats have been asserting that in the media, but it hasn't been getting a lot of traction. For the Speaker of the House to come out and say, well, we had no control and Israel was going to do it regardless, even though the U.S. is Israel's biggest benefactor, supplies the weapons and money and cover on the world stage, to say that Israel wasn't going to listen to the U.S., so we had to act. This is not going to go over well, obviously, with Democrats who are growingly frustrated here on Capitol Hill with the behavior of the Benjamin Netanyahu government. This is going to really divide the Trump base because let's not forget, he said this was America first. Now for the leadership to come out and say, well, we did it because Israel was going to do it. There's a growing fracture within the mega base. We've seen commentators like Tucker Carlson come out highly critical of Israel's actions and the U.S. response to Israel. It's going to be really interesting to see if that continues to grow because that is a remarkable admission from the Speaker of the House. Now, as to Marco Rubio,